Hello, everybody. This is Nikki from Motherhood Unfiltered. It's going to be okay. And today's guest is Allison Lieberman, and she is a licensed marriage and family therapist, a postpartum anxiety expert, mom of two, and two-time postpartum anxiety survivor. She's also the co founder of Rooted in Harmony Counseling, which is a California based group therapy practice dedicated to helping moms with anxiety, relationships, and parenting. And she is the host of the New Mama Mentor podcast and creator of the New Mama Mentor signature program. She's definitely passionate about helping new moms overcome anxiety by developing confidence, shedding the mom guilt, and building a community. I'm so excited to get to talk to her today about postpartum and anxiety and depression. Um, when I was having my kids, which was like 26 something years ago, um, we we didn't talk about that, you know, and it wasn't something that me personally, I think every mother goes through it. But back then, I don't know what the deal was, but not everybody had it, you know. So, but anyway, before we bring her on, I just would like to remind everybody to, uh, if you're listening on Anchor or on the podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe or share it with someone because sharing is caring. And I care a lot. So, anyway, without further ado, let's bring Allison on. Hi, Allison.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, tell us a little bit about yourself. And I mean, when I was reading off all the things that you've done, to me, the one that sticks out the most is mom of two, because that job never ends.
Hmm.
My boys are growing up now, and I still am their mom. It just never goes away. So yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself and what was pivotal in you wanting to reach out to help other moms deal with postpartum depression and anxiety.
Yeah. So I am a marriage and family therapist, and I've been a therapist since 2014. I got licensed in 2017, and I
Hmm.
had my son in 2018. And after I had him, in hindsight, I obviously realized I was struggling with postpartum anxiety, but at the time, I was very perplexed about what was
Hmm.
going on with me. I
Right,
could tell that I was struggling, but I didn't know why. And none of the things I used to be able to do to help with my anxiety were working. And
right.
nobody that I talked to, one, asked me if I was struggling in that way, but also nobody knew when I would communicate it what was going on. They were like, "Oh yeah,
Mm.
like, anxiety, that's fine. Here's
Yeah,
some medication or whatever. Here's some
yeah,
pills
that
to take pills."
happens.
Yeah. So, I was sort of venturing into trying to understand what I wanted to do with my career a little bit more. And I sort of found this whole network of perinatal mental health professionals through
Hmm.
Postpartum Support International and started doing a lot of research and
Hmm.
realizing, like, oh my gosh, like I have postpartum anxiety and it's never
Yeah,
gone away. And then during this time too, I was pregnant. And
right.
again with my daughter, and so
Yeah.
I sort of dove into learning more about it, and then I had my daughter the first week of the pandemic.
Oh
So
gosh.
needless to say, I had postpartum anxiety again after having her, and I don't think it ever went away because I didn't really
No,
do
no.
anything about it with my son because I didn't know. So
Yeah.
the first year of my daughter's life was really difficult for a lot of
Yeah.
reasons, pandemic being one of them. But
Mhm.
managing two kids when you're already so anxious is so hard.
Mhm.
And, I was running my own business and we were under lockdown and we had to decide. It felt like every decision for our kids was life and death. So that's
Right.
that's sort of where everything started and it sort of progressed from there.
Well, I needed you 26 years ago because every every decision I felt like I made was a life and death situation. We weren't even in a pandemic then, you know. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
really, I mean, I everybody, if you've not had to take care of toddlers and infants, I mean, it's a hard job, and it's physical and it can be mental, because maybe you don't know if they're why they're crying or what's upsetting them or whatever, let alone still having to deal with this major event that happened where you gave birth, whether it was naturally or surgically. I mean, that is a big thing. I mean, like now, today, when you have a surgery, you're off work for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
But when you have a baby, you got to take care of that baby. You don't get to wait 6 weeks before you take care.
Yeah.
You're fully, developed or, oh my God, developed, healed.
Same difference, really, right? You're developing
Yeah,
as a new mom and you're healing at the same time. So,
right,
yeah,
right.
yeah,
So
totally.
go ahead. I was just going to talk about or ask you about. So, I mean, we've all heard about the baby blues.
Hmm.
So, is there anything new that's out there since, these baby blues? I mean, yeah, the people will say you've just got the baby blues, but you could be really hurting inside, and I don't want people just to take that lightly, right?
Yeah, yeah. So we distinguish between baby blues, postpartum depression, and postpartum anxiety because they are
Mhm,
very different and there's a lot of similarities, right?
mhm,
So in terms of baby blues versus a postpartum mental health disorder, we're just
mhm,
looking at a timeline, really. Baby blues are the first 2 to 3 weeks after you have a baby, and they're typically your body's reaction not only to lack of sleep, but the adjustment and also your
mhm.
hormones.
Right.
From the moment you find out you're pregnant, your body is producing more and more and more and more hormones to get ready for childbirth, right? So
Mhm.
you're sort of over 10 months developing this hormonal increase. And then
Yeah.
once you have the baby, it's about 3 days that
Mhm.
those take to drop all the way back down. So that's pretty drastic when you think about
Yeah.
it. Like,
Yeah.
no wonder why we're a hot mess when we get home from the hospital, right?
I know.
So, when you think of it that way, baby blues make sense. Like everybody's
Yeah.
adjusting and it's a really
Mhm.
tough time. And when I think back to the 2 to 3 weeks after I had both my kids, it was like a blur. I don't remember anything, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you're talking about postpartum depression and anxiety, to theoretically speaking, we're talking about the first year postpartum. That's sort of like the
Mm.
quote unquote time frame is 1 year after you have a baby is postpartum.
Gotcha. Yeah.
What we see is that like postpartum depression and anxiety can definitely extend beyond a year. I don't think it's
Mhm.
really fair to say 1 year exactly and then you
Yeah.
should be cured. And it can happen for a lot of reasons. So,
Right.
one of the things I focus on a lot in my coaching and in therapy is, the expectations that we set for ourselves as moms
Mhm.
before we become moms is a huge contributor to our internal narrative, right?
No
Like
way.
if you're like, I'm never going to yell at my kids, my parents yelled at me and I refuse to yell at my kids, I will never do that. And then you yell at your kid, you're a failure
Yeah.
automatically, right? Like you have set yourself up for failure and you are going to ruminate on that all night long. And
Yeah.
so and we naturally do that. It's not necessarily like, okay, stop setting expectations, but
Mhm.
it's being able to identify like, okay, that expectation maybe wasn't a realistic one that I set for myself, and I need to
Yeah.
adjust to this change. And that adjustment is typically why we see people in therapy
Mhm.
or needing more help.
Oh my lord.
So
My light went off. We'll just turn it back on. There we
there we
go.
go. So yeah, that's sort of like the big differences between those two
Yeah.
things. There's of course different symptoms for different things, but baby blues and
Right.
postpartum depression overlap in their symptoms. It's
Yeah.
just more around the duration and connection element to the
Gotcha.
baby.
Yeah. Well, that makes it more clear in my head, because, I don't want, 10 years later be like, "Oh, I'm crying because I have baby blues," and,
Yeah.
my kids are in school, so but,
Yeah.
so that just reminds me of something, um, expectations. So, I had expectations, of course, before my boys were born, well, especially the first one, and then, their dad had expectations that he wanted me to live up to.
Mhm.
And sometimes I found that kind of extremely hard to follow, and
Yeah.
it got to the point where it just wasn't working out what he expected me to be doing. Because I thought when we had the discussion on what we wanted for our kids, that he would be an equal partner
Yeah.
in all of it. But because I'm the mom and I know everything, then I was the one that was, doing everything with the kids. So I think that's important too, to point out that, you can't put expectations on the mother of the baby,
Yeah. And
and it just limits them.
totally. And it's hard because we all have expectations of
Mhm.
everything and everyone
Right.
and everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And it's more just acknowledging that those expectations are there and
Mhm.
monitoring them, right? Like
Yeah.
one of the biggest issues of couples, and we see a lot of couples postpartum, is that, they come from different backgrounds,
Yeah.
parenting and relationship wise, right? And
Mhm.
my husband and I are very similar to that, where his parents are still married and his
Yeah.
mom stayed home and took care of them and did all the transporting and all the appointments,
Right.
and my father-in-law didn't. He was working full time, and so that's sort
Yeah.
of the vision that my husband had of parenting. And
Mhm.
verbally, we talk about this a lot, our ideal versus our authentic self. So like what we
Yeah.
want to think we are and what we actually are always different, right?
Of
And so
course.
his ideal self is the 50-50, like we are equal partners in everything, right? But his true self is not ever seeing that the male in his life is taking initiative and doing these things because he's
Yeah.
working. And the
Right,
difference
right.
is that I'm also working and I'm not
Yeah.
full-time caretaker for our kids. And so
Right.
there has to be a balance. And so
Mhm.
that's been a lot of navigating over the last 4-ish
Yeah.
years, is figuring out like his expectations of me might be higher than he even realizes.
Yeah.
And my expectations of myself are higher because I came from divorced parents who both knew how to do everything and were
Right.
responsible for everything in my life. And
Right.
so, I had a much more 50-50 upbringing. And so that's my expectation of him,
Yeah.
which at
Yeah.
times is unfair because he doesn't know some of that stuff.
Right. I think, recognizing that and then just having the regular conversations around that, I mean, you can't fault someone for not knowing how to do something. And, but, if they're willing to learn, then yeah, let me show you how, I've been doing it. And then you can, adjust as whatever. I just, in today's world, there more and more parents are both of them are working, you know,
Mhm.
and it takes sometimes it takes the whole tribe to pitch in to help, and
Yeah.
I feel like there's some in some cultures where the whole family pitches in, and like they live with the grandparents live with them, or the aunties or whatever, and it's not just the mom and dad and the kids, it's like the whole entire immediate families with you, and everybody pitches in to help.
Yeah.
And I just feel like it would be beneficial, if for especially young mothers who are coming home with a baby, they get that extra support, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too with COVID, it really threw a wrench in things. We sort
oh
of from
God.
the beginning were like, we have to have our parents help. Like that's
Hmm.
gonna be our bubble. Like we cannot survive
Yeah.
without it, you know?
Right.
And so that was sort of the decision that we made. And I don't know how we would have done it without them because
Right.
I, it would
I
have
don't
been
know
too
how
hard.
most of the parents did it because the kids had to stay home and the parents still have to work. I'm like,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
what are these people? There are some people who were able to stay home, because they could, work remote, but not everybody was able to do that. And they're just like, okay, we're still under quarantine. I just felt so bad, just thinking about that, the
Yeah.
struggles that young families had to go through to deal
Yeah.
with that.
Well, even like 2 months ago, we all got COVID. My whole household got COVID. And, we went in under lockdown, and
Hmm.
my husband and I both are self employed. So, like, we
Yeah.
still have to work for the 2.5 weeks that we can't go anywhere and our kids can't go
Right.
anywhere. But,
Right.
so it's like, I'll take an hour, you take an hour, and we're going to alternate clients. And, it's a lot. It's a lot
Yeah.
to navigate and manage. And if you have a hard time communicating what it is you need and when you need it, it's going to be really hard to do those things.
Right.
And we did not do it seamlessly by any means. There was lots
Of
of
course not. I mean, we're human beings.
yeah, yeah,
So what would someone who doesn't have, you know, maybe a young mother or something who doesn't have someone to help out with that? I mean, what can they do to navigate, you know, those feelings of anxiety? Because that I would could imagine be more anxiety if you didn't have someone to help you.
yeah. Well, it's interesting because I've had those days where like I'm home and I'm trying to multitask and work with one of my kids home with me, and like
Hmm.
I'm immediately not the nicest version of myself, and I'm not
Yeah.
paying as much attention to my work as I should be. And
Right.
there's times where I have to stop myself and think like nobody's getting the best version of me right now. So like how do
Yeah.
I separate my time so that I can give my attention to my kids and also work and give my attention there. And so
Right.
it's sort of resetting the expectations around that too, right? Like you
Hmm.
can't do all of it at the same time. You can only
Right.
turn on so many movies to entertain your kids before they're bored. And I'm like, I am pro TV. Like I know that it is a survival thing. So like I
I
know
was too.
I I am a TV user. I like all the above, right? But at one point they're going to need a different type of stimulation that might require your attention. And so it's being
Yeah.
able to acknowledge like, all right, like I got done what I got done, and now I
Hmm.
need to engage. And if I engage for 30 minutes, maybe they'll have another activity that they can do independently and I can go back to working or whatever, right?
Right. Right.
So it's sort of being able to take that step back, which is really hard. Like it takes
Yeah.
time and practice to do that. But, other people's expectations don't have to be your expectations. So if your boss
Hmm.
is expecting you to quote unquote work from home and be working the whole time, well, they're not there. So they don't really know how feasible that is.
Yeah. I need to take a break,
Yeah.
mister.
Yeah. Like,
Not,
I'm
I mean, not
sorry.
only for the kids, but for yourself,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
because sometimes we, without even realize it, we'll get all these pokers in the fire, and before you know it, they're all red hot, and you're like,
Yes.
"Oh my goodness, which one do I pick up?"
Yeah.
So, that's good advice to, just take that moment and reset and reevaluate your situation. And like, I mean, I do this at work. Like, I prioritize, you know, when I feel like I'm starting to get overwhelmed. And I guess you could do that too, right?
Hmm.
Prioritize, okay, the baby's screaming. Let me take care of the baby.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, because if you're working from home, then you can definitely tell them, I'll be right back.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's challenging too, like when you feel like you're burning the candle at both ends and you're not
Mhm.
performing as a parent and you're not performing as an employee or a wife
Right,
or a friend or whatever, right? So
right.
it's accepting that, like, we've agreed to be parents in whatever capacity we have, and
Mhm,
that's truly what our main job is, and everything else is on top of that. And so
mhm.
how do we honor that while also not losing ourselves?
Right. Those are good thoughts. So what about these intrusive thoughts? I mean, I have intrusive thoughts.
Yeah,
Sometimes
yeah.
they're good and sometimes they're not.
Yeah, yeah. We all have intrusive thoughts, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's just a part of life. And sometimes my friends and I will laugh about, like, oh yeah, I've had that thought before, right? Like, and intrusive thoughts can be really scary,
Yeah.
especially if you don't know what they are or why they're happening. For me in particular, I had intrusive thoughts, but not ones that meant anything to me, right? Like, it
Mhm.
was like, while you're driving, like, what if that car hits me? But like, you keep
Yeah.
driving, like, so for me, my intrusive thoughts became very much about my kids and
Mhm.
what
Yeah.
would happen to them and
Yeah.
how would I react to what happened to them. And
Right.
it was all consuming and terrifying because I knew I
Yeah.
didn't want anything to happen to them, but I couldn't stop thinking about bad things happening. And
Yeah.
it's really hard, and it's definitely still something that I'm navigating every day
Mhm.
and trying to manage it. I will say, like, medication really helped. I
Yeah.
definitely notice a correlation with my hormones and
Mhm.
my intrusive thoughts, and when they're more likely to come in and when they're not. Stress,
Right.
like, I this coming weekend, my kids are going to be staying with my in-laws, and my in-laws are great. I trust them. But if I'm not with my kids, I'm automatically anxious, right? Because,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? So I know that predictably my intrusive thoughts are probably going to come back, right?
Mhm.
And so it's knowing that they're going to go away again and they're just thoughts and they're not
Mhm.
confirmation. And even if
Right.
something were to happen to my kids or to somebody else's kids that's similar to my intrusive thoughts, like,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that that is confirmation that what I'm thinking is true. The
Right.
other part of it is, like, how we manage intrusive thoughts when they're really distressing, and typically with new moms, is we try to do something to make the thought go away, right? So for
Yeah.
me, it was like, okay, I have this thought, something bad's going to happen to my kid. I'm going to go check on them. And then I'm just going to do that over and over and over again, right? And
I did
I'm
not sleep the first time. I mean, when I had my oldest Oliver, I was so afraid because they were campaigning, SIDS.
yep, yep, yep.
A lot of SIDS deaths were going on, and, I swear, I would wake up every hour on the hour and go check, you
Yeah,
know, because I was having those intrusive thoughts. I
yeah.
And their dad was like, "You need to stop,"
And
because I
it's
was waking up.
interesting because when you're leaving the hospital, and, like, I didn't give birth that long ago. So, like, I'm assuming this is still the case, but, like, there's three things they touch on. Number one is safe sleep to prevent SIDS. And they, like,
Mhm.
really talk to you about that a lot. They send you home with a lot of paperwork, and you're like,
Mhm. Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
You know, postpartum depression, and they really hone in on like, if you want to harm yourself or your baby, you call 911 or whatever, right? So that's the other one.
Mhm.
And then the last one is shaking the baby. So like, if you get really frustrated and you feel like you want to shake the baby, just put the baby in a safe place and walk outside. And like, in theory, all of that is great. Those are all really important
Yeah.
things. But like, what else? What else am I like? How common is this? Like, is there anything else to this, right? So, like,
I know.
I was scared that, like,
Yeah.
oh, like, they're talking to me about shaking my baby. I've literally never had
Yeah.
somebody that I know do that, but, like, does that mean I'm gonna do it because now they've put that in my brain,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Like, am I gonna lose my crap and do something I
yeah.
didn't mean to do, you know?
Right, right. Or like, if am I gonna get depressed? I'm just gonna wake up one day and I'm gonna be like, oh, I want to kill myself or my baby. Like, that also didn't feel good. But like, there's
Yeah.
nobody like saying like, okay, these are the things to look out for. Do you have questions on these things? Like, let's talk about
Right.
them. Like, what's the concern? Do you have a history in any of this? Like, there's no
Yeah.
information really. It's just pamphlet after pamphlet after pamphlet because that's what the hospital
Oh
has to
my lord,
do
they're
to
still
prevent being
doing
sued.
that, Allison. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what they did, with me when we came home. I came home with this little plastic bag full of pamphlets and things, and I'm like, first of all, I don't. You want me to read this, okay? And second of all, I'm freaking out because I'm worried about driving home with the kid in the car. you know,
Right, right, and, like, they're
I
not
may
sending
not
you
even
home with
make
a
it to the house.
pamphlet. Yeah. They're not like, "Here's safe car seat practices," like, something that you can do, right? And they're definitely not like, "Oh, you have or you might have postpartum depression. Here's a list of local therapists in the area that specialize in that." Like, they don't do that, right? And so you're sort of, like, stuck in this, like, "All right, well, I have a lot of information and nothing to do with it."
Yeah.
And then you're terrified that that's gonna be you,
Mhm.
or that, like, you're not gonna know what to do, and
Right.
there's just so
Call
many facts.
911. I
Yeah.
think I might wanna harm my baby, and the next thing you know, child services is coming in,
Yes.
and you're like, "I wasn't doing anything."
Yeah,
I
and
figure we need to get a handle on the mental health situation in our country, and it
we
just
really
seems
do.
yeah, it just seems kind of backwards or
Yeah.
not there at all, but, I think that was, okay, let's talk about this and then we'll wrap it up, but boundaries. So what
Yeah.
kind of boundaries are we setting for ourselves? Because obviously, I didn't set any boundaries for myself, and, I about drove myself and my family insane. Um,
Yeah.
I can remember it clearly, and um, I just wanna call it a monster, I guess, and, actually, that reminds me of something else. So, I'm gonna get off track here, but going back to intrusive thoughts. So, anytime I had an intrusive thought, I would talk to my mother-in-law about it or talk to, my mom or my grandma, and they would be like, "I'm taking care of them.
Yeah.
What is why are you worried?" And I'm like, "I'm not trying to be offensive, you
Yeah.
know. Um this is just my concerns.
Yeah.
And it would be like I was insulting them, you
Yeah.
know. And I mean, um how would someone react to that? I mean, I was just trying, to voice my concerns, and they're taking it as, all out war. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, so, there's a level of vulnerability around some of this too, which is a really hard thing. But being able to tell somebody, like, I know that you're taking care of my child and I'm really struggling and I need to hear you say that everything's going to be okay. That's a vulnerable thing to do, right?
mhm.
And like, you can understand on the other side of that, like, why are you letting me take your kid if you're not going to trust me? Right.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's the boundary stuff. right? So it's
Mhm.
all connected, and we have to have boundaries with ourselves, with our partners, with
Mhm.
our babies, with our families, with our friends. And
Mhm.
especially in those first few months, it's really hard because you don't know what you need. You don't know what the baby needs, and everybody's asking you
Yeah.
what you need, and you're like, I don't know. Stop asking me.
Can
So,
I get some answers to your questions?
yeah. So, with boundaries for yourself, the boundaries that you need are like, I know that I need to take time for myself, even if it's only 10 minutes a day. I have to
Mhm.
do it and I need to make time for it. And that's what's important. And not using that time to clean bottles or pump or breastfeed or
Yeah.
whatever. It is strictly
Right.
time for you. And you
Right.
have to do that, right?
Right.
With your partner, it's being able to kind of what we were already talking about is this
Mhm.
reestablish those expectations. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not going to have the dishes done by the end of the day if that's your expectation. Just not going
Mhm.
to. So if you
Mhm.
want them done, it's something that you need to do, or you need to be more flexible,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
With your family, it's knowing that they are always going to have opinions on you and your without a doubt, they've done it better, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And like, that's totally fine. Sometimes people's opinions are helpful. You're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I thought about that," right?
Right. Right.
Other times you're like, "Yeah, I already tried that and that wasn't helpful, but thank you," right?
Yeah.
Or like, we don't do things like that anymore. Like, that was
Mhm.
an outdated suggestion. But
Yeah.
you don't have to accept it and you don't have to reject it. You can just say, "Oh, thanks,"
Yeah.
right? And then let it go. Like, people are just giving you advice because they don't know what else to say.
That sounds very wise. Allison, you're wise beyond your years.
Thank you.
Well, Allison, I am so glad that you were able to get on and chat with me about this extremely important message about postpartum anxiety, setting boundaries, dealing with intrusive thoughts. How can the audience, if they want to reach out, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram at the new mama mentor, and the
Hmm.
counseling practice is at Rooted in Harmony Counseling. Our
Hmm.
website is www.rihcounseling.com.
Hmm.
And the podcast is the New Mama Mentor Podcast.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so, one last little tidbit. You got some advice for us before we hang it up?
Any advice whatsoever?
Yeah, any advice?
Okay. I guess
I'm
my
thinking
one
like, let's go drink some wine or something, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess my best piece of advice to anybody is like, take 10 minutes to reset at any point in your
Yeah,
day and ask yourself what it is that you need. Might be
right.
nothing, might be a vacation, might be a massage, might be
Yeah.
watching reality TV, right? Like, could be
Hmm.
a full plethora of things, but taking that
Hmm.
time to check in with yourself can be all the
I used
difference.
to lock myself in the bathroom.
Yeah. Yeah. I take baths. I take baths twice a day. They bookend my day, and that is my time where I check in with myself and think like,
Yeah,
"What is it that I need?" Right?
that's
And
awesome.
that's because no one can bug me in there. So,
Right. Well, Allison, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that we can talk again in the future.
yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.